Some accusations don't just ruin reputations, they kill dreams. He was supposed to be the kid who made it out, the high school football star with a full-ride scholarship waiting, the son whose talent was going to change his family's future. Then, in a single afternoon, one girl pointed at him and said a word that detonated everything he had worked for. The school believed her within minutes. The town believed her within hours. And by nightfall, he became a villain in a story he never wrote. His mother begged everyone to slow down, to listen, to look deeper. They didn't. What no one knew, not the school, not the district attorney, not even the girl who made the accusation, was that the key to the truth sat quietly in a mother's hands, waiting for the moment her breaking heart would become her greatest weapon. Welcome to True Crime Story HQ. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe. Dominique Barber's father died when he was just 9 years old. He had enough reasons to give up, but he never did. So what got Dominique to stardom? To answer that, we need to go back to the very beginning. Raymond Barber was a construction foreman who worked long hours to provide for his family. He died in a scaffolding collapse on a job site 3 weeks before Christmas. There was no substantial life insurance, no safety net, just medical bills from his brief hospitalization, funeral costs that Helen, his wife, couldn't afford, and a mortgage she had no idea how to pay alone. Raymond's family blamed Helen for his death. His brothers, Calvin and Vernon, told anyone who would listen that she had pushed Raymond to work too much overtime, that she had been demanding, that she had wanted things they couldn't afford. They said these things at the funeral. They said these things to Helen's face. Calvin cornered Helen at the repast and told her flat out, "That boy needs uncles, not a grieving woman who doesn't understand what men need." Vernon nodded in agreement and added that Dominique should learn a trade like his father. That football was a waste of time, that Helen was filling the boy's head with impossible dreams. When they tried to petition for partial custody 6 months later, Helen cut contact entirely. She refused to let them poison her son with their bitterness. She refused to let them tell Dominique that his dreams didn't matter. Helen became both mother and father overnight. She took a housekeeping job in the mornings, cleaning hotel rooms downtown. She worked retail in the evenings, folding clothes and ringing up customers until the store closed at 9. Every dollar was stretched. Every sacrifice was deliberate. She skipped meals so Dominique could eat. She wore the same 3 outfits for 2 years. She let the electricity get shut off twice rather than miss a mortgage payment. She made Raymond a promise at his grave. "I'll get our boy out of this life. I'll make sure he has what we never had." Dominique didn't waste his mother's sacrifices. He threw himself into football like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Maybe it was. He woke up at 5 in the morning to run drills in the park before school. He studied game film on a laptop Helen bought from a pawn shop. He lifted weights in their garage using equipment a neighbor gave them for free. By his junior year, Dominique was the best running back in the state. Coaches called him a once-in-a-generation talent. All-state honors. Recruitment letters arriving every week from Division I programs across the country. A grade point average above 3.5 despite the fact that Helen's work schedule meant he studied alone most nights. His teammates described him as the most respectful kid they'd ever met. His teachers said he never caused trouble, never talked back, never made excuses when he was late because he'd had to take 2 buses to get to school. People in their neighborhood rallied behind him. He represented something bigger than football. He represented hope for families like his. Proof that hard work and talent could actually change your life. Helen attended every single game. She sat in the bleachers with a thermos of coffee, her body aching from cleaning rooms all day. She cheered louder than anyone else. She cried when he scored touchdowns. She stayed after games to help fold up equipment because the coaches had been good to her son. College scouts started circling during Dominique's senior year. Offers were coming. Full-ride scholarships to programs that could launch him into the NFL if he kept working. Helen allowed herself to believe the worst was finally behind them, that Raymond's death hadn't been for nothing, that their suffering had a purpose. Dominique knew what the scholarship meant. It meant his mother could finally rest. It meant the debt could be paid. It meant Raymond's memory would be honored. He carried that weight every single day, but he never complained. He just worked harder. The community loved Dominique Barber. They loved his story. They loved his humility. They loved watching him run through defensive lines like they weren't even there. Everyone loved Dominique Barber. Everyone except one person who wanted his attention more than anything in the world. Before you continue with this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support keeps these stories alive. At this point, we shift our focus for just a brief moment to talk about someone who played a critical role in Dominique's story. Her name? Joy Terry. Joy Terry was an only child. Her father, Emmanuel, worked as an insurance adjuster. Her mother, Mercy, was an administrative assistant at an elementary school. They were the kind of people who smiled too much in public and avoided conflict at all costs. They wanted everyone to see them as good people, as reasonable people, as people who cared deeply about doing the right thing. Joy learned very early that the way to get what she wanted was to cry. When she was 7 years old, she told her parents that another child had pushed her off the swing set at the playground. Emmanuel and Mercy marched straight to the school and demanded an investigation. Teachers reviewed what happened. Other children said Joy had actually pushed the other girl first. But Emmanuel and Mercy didn't care. They threatened to sue the school unless someone apologized to their daughter. The school apologized. Joy got ice cream that night. The pattern repeated throughout her childhood. Joy would make an accusation. Her parents would believe her without question. They would demand action. They would threaten consequences. And Joy would be rewarded with attention, gifts, and validation. By the time Joy reached middle school, she had accused 3 different classmates of bullying her. None of the accusations were true. Teachers started walking on eggshells around her because they knew any criticism would result in an angry phone call from Emmanuel. Classmates learned to avoid her entirely. Joy was lonely. She had no real friends because people her age could see through her act. But she had her parents' unwavering support, and that felt like enough. She internalized a simple lesson. Victimhood was power. Truth didn't matter as much as perception. Tears were weapons that adults couldn't defend against. By high school, Joy was socially invisible. She wasn't popular. She wasn't athletic. She wasn't invited to parties or included in group chats. She sat alone at lunch most days, scrolling through her phone and watching other people live the lives she wanted. That's when she noticed Dominique Barber. At first, it wasn't romantic. She was just fascinated by how much attention he received. People cheered for him in the hallways. Teachers praised him in class. Girls flirted with him openly. He seemed to move through the world with this easy confidence that Joy had never experienced herself. She started watching him, not in an obvious way. Just small glances in the cafeteria, sitting a few rows behind him in study hall, standing near his locker between classes. Joy convinced herself that if she could just get him to notice her, everything would change. She would finally matter to someone. She would finally be chosen. She tried leaving notes in his locker. He never responded. She commented on his social media posts. He never acknowledged them. She engineered situations where they would bump into each other in the hallway. He was always polite but completely disengaged. Dominique Barber didn't see Joy Terry. He didn't see her at all. Other students started to notice Joy's behavior. They whispered about it. They laughed about it. One girl asked Joy directly if she had a crush on Dominique, and the mockery in her voice was unmistakable. Joy's humiliation was complete. The boy she wanted didn't know she existed, and the people who did know were making fun of her. Then the scholarship rumors started. People said Dominique was going to get a full ride to a top program, that he was going to make it out, that his life was about to change forever. Joy's fascination twisted into something darker. She started thinking, why does he get everything when he won't even look at me? The thought became a loop in her head. It played over and over until it didn't sound irrational anymore. She started fantasizing about ways to hurt him. Nothing serious at first. Just idle thoughts about how she could knock him down a peg. Make him feel small the way she felt small. Then came the hallway incident. It was nothing. Dominique was rushing to football practice and accidentally bumped Joy's shoulder as he passed. He apologized without stopping. He didn't even turn around to see who he'd bumped into. Joy stood frozen in the crowded hallway. A small group of students had seen the whole thing. One of them laughed. Another said something about Joy being invisible even when someone ran into her. That night, Joy sat in her room and stared at the ceiling. Her humiliation had reached a breaking point. She had spent months trying to get Dominique to notice her, and he couldn't even be bothered to look at her face when he apologized. She told her mother that Dominique had made her feel uncomfortable. Mercy immediately asked for details. Joy kept the story vague on purpose. She said he had been too close in the hallway, that he made her feel unsafe, that she didn't want to go into specifics because it was too upsetting. Emmanuel overheard the conversation and joined in. He told Joy to write everything down, to document dates and times, to keep a record in case it happened again. Joy recognized what was happening. Her parents were building a case for her without her even asking. They were doing what they always did, believing her, protecting her, preparing to fight on her behalf. For the first time in months, Joy felt powerful. She realized she didn't need Dominique to notice her. She could destroy him instead. She could take away everything he had the same way he had taken away her dignity by ignoring her. 3 days later, Joy walked into the guidance counselor's office in tears. Mrs. Patterson, the guidance counselor, looked up from her desk when Joy entered. The girl's face was red and blotchy. Her hands were shaking. She could barely get the words out. Joy said that Dominique Barber had been following her, that he made her feel unsafe, that she didn't know what to do anymore because no one was listening to her. Mrs. Patterson had been trained to take all reports seriously. She didn't ask Joy to prove anything. She didn't question the story. She picked up the phone and called the principal immediately. Within 15 minutes, there was an emergency meeting in the principal's office. Mr. Whitmore sat behind his desk. The vice principal stood near the window. The school resource officer took notes in the corner. Joy repeated her story. This time, it had more details. She said Dominique had been making inappropriate comments, that he followed her between classes, that she felt threatened by his presence. She didn't provide specific dates. She didn't name any witnesses. She didn't describe exactly what he had said or done. But she cried. She trembled. She looked terrified. Mr. Whitmore asked if she wanted to file a formal complaint. Joy nodded. He asked if her parents knew. She said they did. He asked if she felt safe going home. She said yes, but only because Dominique lived on the other side of town. The administrators exchanged glances. They knew what this meant. A Title IX complaint. Potential liability. Media attention if it went public. The school board breathing down their necks. Mr. Whitmore made the decision quickly. He told the resource officer to remove Dominique from class immediately. He called Emmanuel and Mercy Terry and told them to come to the school. He instructed the vice principal to begin an investigation. Dominique was in chemistry class when the resource officer walked in. The room went silent. Every student turned to watch as the officer approached Dominique's desk and asked him to come to the office. Dominique didn't understand what was happening. He grabbed his backpack and followed the officer out of the room. Behind him, students were already pulling out their phones. Helen was cleaning a bathroom at the hotel when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer because she wasn't supposed to take personal calls during her shift. But something told her to pick up. The vice principal's voice was formal and cold. Mrs. Barber, your son has been accused of making another student feel unsafe. You need to come to the school immediately. Helen didn't even clock out. She told her manager there was an emergency and ran to her car. Her hands shook as she drove. Her mind raced through possibilities. Dominique wasn't a troublemaker. He didn't get into fights. He didn't disrespect teachers. This had to be a mistake. She arrived at the school 20 minutes later, still wearing her housekeeping uniform. The front desk secretary looked at her with something close to pity and told her to go straight to the principal's office. When Helen walked in, She saw administrators on one side of the room and a couple she didn't recognize on the other. The couple was dressed nicely. The woman had been crying. The man had his arm around her protectively. Mr. Whitmore gestured for Helen to sit. He explained that Dominique had been accused of inappropriate behavior toward another student, that the accusation was being taken very seriously, that Dominique was suspended effective immediately pending the outcome of an investigation. Helen's first question was, what exactly did he do? The answer was vague. Inappropriate comments, unwanted attention, behavior that made another student feel unsafe. Helen asked, when did this happen? The answer was unclear. Over the past several weeks, Helen asked, who is accusing him? She was told that information was confidential to protect the accuser's privacy. Helen looked at the couple across the room. The woman, Mercy, was staring at the floor. The man, Emmanuel, was glaring at Helen like she had personally harmed his family. Helen turned back to Mr. Whitmore and said, I need to talk to my son. They brought Dominique into the room. He looked terrified. Helen had never seen that expression on his face before. He sat down next to her and whispered, Mom, I don't even know who they're talking about. Helen asked the administrators to explain exactly what Dominique was accused of doing. She asked for dates. She asked for locations. She asked for witnesses. Every answer was frustratingly vague. The investigation was ongoing. Details couldn't be shared yet. Everything would be explained in due time. Emmanuel Terry spoke up for the first time. He said his daughter had been suffering for weeks, that she was terrified to come to school, that Dominique had been stalking her and making threats. Dominique's head snapped up. I don't even know your daughter. Emmanuel's face went red. Are you calling her a liar? Helen put her hand on Dominique's arm to keep him quiet. She looked at Mr. Whitmore and said, This doesn't make sense. My son has football practice every day after school. He comes straight home after that. When is he supposed to have done any of this? Mr. Whitmore said the timeline would be investigated. But for now, Dominique needed to leave campus and stay away until the investigation was complete. Helen stood up. She looked at Mercy and Emmanuel and said, I don't know what your daughter told you, but my son is innocent. Emmanuel stood too. That's what they all say. Helen and Dominique left the building together. The parking lot felt like it was spinning. Dominique got into the passenger seat and put his head in his hands. Helen sat in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel. She said, Tell me the truth. Do you know this girl? Dominique shook his head. I swear, Mom, I don't know who they're talking about. Helen believed him. A mother knows her child. She knew Dominique wasn't capable of what they were describing, but she also knew that wouldn't matter to anyone else. By the time they got home, the story was already spreading. Group chats, social media, whispered conversations in hallways and parking lots. Dominique Barber, the golden boy, had been accused, and in the court of public opinion, that was enough to convict him. The school hired an outside investigator to look into Joy's accusations. His name was Gerald Foster. He was a retired police officer who did freelance work for school districts when they needed to cover themselves legally. Gerald interviewed Joy first. She sat in a conference room with her parents and their attorney. She told her story with tears streaming down her face. She said Dominique had cornered her in empty hallways, that he made comments about her body, that he sent her threatening looks during class, that she was afraid he might hurt her physically. Gerald asked for specifics. Joy said it had happened over several weeks, maybe even months. She couldn't remember exact dates. She said Dominique was careful to make sure no one else was around when he approached her. Gerald asked if she had told anyone when it first started. Joy said she had tried to tell a teacher, but the teacher didn't take her seriously. She couldn't remember which teacher. She couldn't remember when that conversation happened. Gerald asked if she had any text messages or social media interactions with Dominique. Joy said no. He never contacted her online. Everything happened in person. Gerald moved on to interviewing Dominique. The boy sat in the same conference room 2 days later. Helen sat beside him. They couldn't afford an attorney, so it was just the two of them. Dominique maintained his innocence. He said he didn't know Joy Terry. He said he had never spoken to her. He said he had no idea why she would accuse him of anything. Gerald asked where Dominique was after school most days. Dominique said he was at football practice. Practice ran from 3:30 to 6 o'clock every weekday. His coach could confirm that. Gerald asked where Dominique was during lunch. Dominique said he ate in the cafeteria with his teammates. There were dozens of witnesses who could confirm that. Gerald asked if Dominique had ever been alone with Joy. Dominique said no. He didn't even know what she looked like. Gerald made notes. He told Dominique and Helen that he would review the evidence and submit his report to the school board. Over the next 2 weeks, Gerald conducted additional interviews. He spoke to teachers who had Joy and Dominique in their classes. None of them had witnessed any concerning interactions. He spoke to Dominique's teammates. All of them said Dominique was at practice during the times Joy claimed incidents occurred. Gerald requested security footage from the school. The cameras showed Dominique walking through hallways between classes, but there was no footage of him approaching Joy or following her. The cameras showed him leaving campus immediately after practice each day. Gerald reviewed the football team's attendance logs. Dominique had perfect attendance at practice. His coach confirmed that he was never late and never left early. Gerald submitted his report to Mr. Whitmore. The report concluded that there was insufficient evidence to prove Joy's accusations. However, it also stated that there was insufficient evidence to disprove them. Gerald recommended that the school take action to ensure Joy felt safe, even if that meant removing Dominique from campus. The school board scheduled a hearing to decide Dominique's fate. Helen received 72 hours notice. She couldn't afford to miss work, but she took an unpaid day off anyway. The hearing was held in a conference room at the district office. The school board sat on one side of a long table. Emmanuel, Mercy, and their attorneys sat on the other side. Helen and Dominique sat alone at a smaller table off to the side. Joy didn't attend. Her attorney read a prepared statement on her behalf. The statement described Joy as a traumatized victim who was too frightened to face her accuser. It described Dominique as a predator who used his status as a football star to intimidate vulnerable students. Helen was allowed to speak. She stood up and presented the evidence that Gerald had gathered. She showed the practice logs. She referenced the security footage. She pointed out that no one had witnessed Dominique doing anything inappropriate. The school board listened politely. Then the board president said, "We understand your son denies these allegations, Mrs. Barber, but we have a responsibility to protect all students. Given the seriousness of these accusations, we cannot allow your son to remain on campus." Helen said, "You're expelling him based on accusations with no proof." The board president said, "We're taking necessary precautions to ensure a safe learning environment." The vote was 5-2. Dominique was permanently expelled. The expulsion would be noted on his school transcript. He would not be allowed to walk at graduation. His athletic eligibility was terminated immediately. Helen and Dominique walked out of that hearing in silence. Outside, Emmanuel and Mercy were standing by their car. Emmanuel looked satisfied. Mercy looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. Helen drove home with tears streaming down her face. Dominique stared out the window and didn't speak. That night, Helen sat at their kitchen table and looked at the stack of recruitment letters that had come in the mail. Letters from coaches who had promised Dominique a future. Letters that would never be answered now. She thought about Raymond, about the promise she had made at his grave, about how she had failed. Then she thought, no, this isn't over. Within days, the local newspaper ran a story about Dominique's expulsion. The headline didn't mention his name, but everyone in town knew who it was about. Star athlete expelled following accusations of misconduct. Social media picked up the story immediately. People who had cheered for Dominique at football games were now calling him a predator. Parents who had let their children ride home with him after practice were now saying they had always sensed something was off about him. The college recruiters stopped calling. The scholarship offers disappeared. Coaches who had promised to stay in touch went silent. Dominique's teammates stopped answering his texts. His friends at school avoided him in public. Teachers who had written recommendation letters for him now acted like they had never known him. Helen faced similar treatment. Her co-workers whispered when she walked into the break room. Her manager pulled her aside and suggested that maybe she should consider looking for work elsewhere because some customers had expressed discomfort. At church, people who had known Helen for years suddenly found reasons to sit on the other side of the sanctuary. The pastor mentioned during a sermon that the community needed to support victims of violence. Everyone knew who he was talking about. Helen and Dominique became pariahs in their own neighborhood. People crossed the street to avoid walking past them. Neighbors who had brought them casseroles when Raymond died now acted like the Barbers didn't exist. Dominique stopped leaving the house. He spent entire days in his bedroom with the lights off. He stopped eating. He stopped showering. He stopped doing anything that required him to acknowledge he was still alive. Helen watched her son disappear. She saw the light go out of his eyes. She heard him crying through the wall at night. She found a note he had written and hidden under his mattress. The note said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't do this anymore." She took every sharp object out of the house. She hid all the medications. She slept on the floor outside his bedroom door because she was terrified of what he might do if she left him alone. And somewhere across town, Joy Terry was counting settlement money and posting photos of her new designer handbags on social media. Emmanuel and Mercy hired an attorney 2 weeks after Dominique's expulsion. The attorney's name was Richard Castellano. He specialized in civil litigation against school districts. Richard reviewed Joy's case and saw an easy win: a young girl traumatized by a predatory athlete, a school that had failed to protect her, a district with deep pockets and a fear of bad publicity. He filed a lawsuit on Joy's behalf claiming negligence, emotional distress, and failure to provide a safe learning environment. The demand was $2 million. The school district's insurance company received the lawsuit and immediately began calculating risk. They looked at the optics: a teenage girl claiming trauma, a football star accused of misconduct, a community already convinced of the boy's guilt. Their lawyers advised settlement. Going to trial meant media coverage. It meant depositions. It meant cross-examination of Joy. It meant the possibility of an even larger jury verdict if the case went badly. The insurance company offered $850,000. Richard took it to Emmanuel and Mercy. He said it was a strong offer, and they should accept. He would take his cut, 33%, and they would walk away with over $500,000. Emmanuel and Mercy accepted. Joy never had to testify under oath. She never had to answer questions under cross-examination. She never had to face any scrutiny of her story. The settlement was finalized within 30 days. The money was deposited into an account controlled by Emmanuel, with Joy listed as beneficiary. The school district issued a brief statement saying they had resolved the matter and wished the Terry family well. Local media reported the settlement as vindication for Joy. School district pays $850,000 to student in misconduct case. The implication was clear. The school had paid because Dominique was guilty. Joy's life changed overnight. Within a week, she bought a luxury sedan, not a used car, not a practical vehicle for a teenager. A brand new luxury sedan with leather seats and a premium sound system. Within 2 weeks, her social media showed a complete transformation. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, concert tickets to sold-out shows, shopping bags from stores most people in their town couldn't afford to window shop in. She posted photos of herself at the beach, at amusement parks, at luxury hotels, always with captions like "blessed" or "living my best life," or "good things come to those who wait." The Terry family home underwent renovations: new kitchen, professional landscaping, an above-ground pool installed in the backyard. Joy's friends, the few she had managed to keep, started appearing in her photos more frequently. They posed with her shopping bags. They tagged her in posts at expensive brunches. They commented heart emojis under every photo. Joy seemed to have no trauma symptoms whatsoever. No therapy appointments mentioned. No withdrawn behavior. No signs of someone recovering from a frightening experience. She was thriving. Helen saw all of it. She followed Joy's social media from a fake account. She screenshotted every post. She documented every purchase. She saved every caption. Helen couldn't afford their apartment anymore. She and Dominique moved into a smaller rental unit on the edge of town. The neighborhood was rough. The walls were thin. The heat barely worked in winter. Helen took on a third job cleaning office buildings at night. She worked from midnight to 4 in the morning, then slept for 3 hours before starting her morning housekeeping shift. She spent every free moment studying Joy's social media. She created spreadsheets tracking Joy's posts. She mapped out timelines. She noted inconsistencies between Joy's supposed trauma and her actual behavior. Helen contacted attorneys. She called every lawyer in their county and explained the situation. She asked if there was any way to challenge the settlement, any way to reopen the case, any way to prove Dominique's innocence. Every single attorney told her the same thing. Without new evidence, there's nothing we can do. The settlement is final. The case is closed. One attorney took pity on her and spent 20 minutes explaining the legal reality. He said, "You need her to admit she lied. You need a recording or a witness or something concrete that proves she made it up. Without that, no one will listen." Helen hung up the phone and stared at her bulletin board. Photos of Joy smiling, screenshots of Joy bragging, evidence of Joy living a life free from consequences. She thought, then that's what I'll get. Helen started planning. She studied Joy's patterns. When she posted, where she went, who she spent time with, what events she attended. Joy frequently posted about community events, school fundraisers, charity galas, places where she could be seen and admired. Helen saw that the school's annual fundraising gala was coming up. It was a big event, expensive tickets, fancy venue. The kind of place where people dressed up and pretended to care about causes. Helen called the event coordinator and volunteered to work as staff. She said she needed the extra money. The coordinator was happy to have help. They needed servers and people to set up tables. Helen bought a cheap recording app for her phone. She tested it dozens of times to make sure the audio was clear. She practiced keeping her phone in her apron pocket with the microphone exposed. She contacted Terrence Shaw, a private investigator who did pro bono work for families dealing with wrongful convictions. Terrence listened to her story and reviewed her documentation. He said, "You've done incredible work, but you need more. You need her on tape admitting what she did." Helen said, "That's the plan." Terrence provided her with professional equipment, a necklace with a hidden microphone, a backup recorder disguised as a pen. He walked her through the legal requirements for recording in their state, single-party consent. As long as Helen was present in the conversation, the recording was legal. They practiced interview techniques, questions designed to make Joy feel comfortable, ways to steer conversation without seeming obvious. Terrence said, "She's confident right now. She thinks she won. That's when people get careless." Helen said, "Good. I'm counting on it." The gala was 3 weeks away. Helen spent those weeks preparing. She memorized Joy's face from photos. She studied her voice from videos. She planned exactly where she would position herself to overhear conversations. At night, Helen lay awake imagining the moment Joy would slip up. The moment the truth would finally come out. The moment she could prove to the world that her son was innocent. Dominique didn't know what his mother was planning. He was too depressed to notice much of anything. He spent his days in bed. He barely spoke. He looked at Helen with hollow eyes that broke her heart every single time. Helen kept going because she had to, because giving up meant letting Joy win, because her son deserved better than being destroyed by a lie, and because somewhere deep inside, Helen knew that liars always slip up eventually. They always get too comfortable. They always say one thing too many. She just had to be there when it happened. The night of the gala arrived. Helen showed up 3 hours early to help with setup. She wore black pants and a white button-up shirt that the coordinator had provided. She kept her head down and her voice quiet. She wanted to blend in completely. The venue was beautiful. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, round tables covered in white linens filled the main hall. A small stage at the front held a podium and a microphone for speeches. Helen helped arrange centerpieces. She folded napkins, she polished silverware, and the entire time she watched the door. Guests started arriving around 6:30. Wealthy donors, school board members, local business owners who wanted to be seen supporting education. Everyone dressed in expensive suits and cocktail dresses. Emmanuel and Mercy Terry arrived at 7. Emmanuel wore a tailored suit. Mercy wore a dress that probably cost more than Helen's monthly rent. They smiled and shook hands with other guests like they belonged there. Joy arrived 10 minutes later with a small group of friends. She wore a designer dress and heels that made her look older than 18. Her hair and makeup were professionally done. She laughed loudly and posed for photos with her friends. Helen felt her stomach turn. This was the girl who claimed to be traumatized. The girl who supposedly lived in fear. The girl whose emotional distress had been worth $850,000. She looked like she was at a party. Helen positioned herself to work the section where the Terrys were seated. She served drinks. She cleared plates. She moved through the room like a ghost. Joy barely glanced at her. To Joy, Helen was just staff. Just another invisible person whose job was to make her comfortable. The evening dragged on. Speeches were made. Donors were thanked. Checks were presented to the school. Helen kept working and watching. Around 9 o'clock, Joy and her friend Pamela stepped outside for air. Helen saw them through the window. They stood on the patio near some decorative plants. Helen grabbed a tray and followed them outside. She pretended to clear empty glasses from a nearby table. She positioned herself behind a large potted plant where she could hear but not be seen. She pulled out her phone and opened the recording app. Her hands were shaking. She pressed record and set the phone on the ledge behind the plant with the microphone pointing toward the girls. Pamela was talking about the dress Joy was wearing. Joy was laughing and saying it cost almost $1,000. Pamela said she couldn't believe Joy had that kind of money now. Joy's voice dropped a little. I know, right? I can't believe the school actually paid it. I didn't think they'd give me the whole amount. Helen froze. Every muscle in her body went still. Pamela said, You're so lucky. I wish something like that would happen to me. Joy laughed. Girl, it was easier than I thought. The school panicked so fast. They just wanted it to go away. Pamela lowered her voice. Were you scared they'd find out you were lying? There was a pause. Helen held her breath. Joy said, I mean, technically I didn't lie. I just made it sound worse than it was. But once the lawyer got involved, he told me exactly what to say. Helen's heart was pounding so hard, she thought it might burst through her chest. Pamela said, So what really happened? Joy sighed. Nothing, honestly. He bumped into me in the hallway once, didn't even apologize properly. I was so mad. Then I realized I could make it into something bigger. Pamela sounded shocked. Wait, so he didn't actually do anything? Joy said, Not really, but people believe anything if you cry hard enough. And the school was terrified of a lawsuit. My dad's lawyer said they'd settle fast if we pushed hard enough. Pamela said, What about Dominique? Isn't he like destroyed? Joy's voice went flat. I mean, yeah, but he should have been nicer to me. He acted like I didn't exist. So now he knows what that feels like. Helen had to bite her lip to keep from making a sound. Tears were running down her face, but she didn't move. Pamela said, That's kind of harsh. Joy said, Whatever. He'll get over it. People forget stuff, and I got paid, so. Both girls laughed. Then Joy said something about going back inside because her feet hurt. Helen waited until they were gone. Then she grabbed her phone and stopped the recording. She checked it. The audio was clear. Every word was there. She left the venue immediately. She didn't clock out. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. She just walked to her car and sat in the driver's seat with her hands on the steering wheel. She had it. She finally had proof. Helen called Terrence Shaw on the drive home. She could barely get the words out. He told her to come to his office first thing in the morning and bring the recording. That night, Helen didn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the recording over and over. Joy's voice saying, "I can't believe the school actually paid it." Joy's voice saying, "I just made it sound worse than it was." Joy's voice saying, "He'll get over it." Helen thought about her son sleeping in the next room, about the last 18 months of hell they had lived through, about the future that had been stolen from him. And she thought, this is just the beginning. Chapter 7. The Sting. Helen met with Terence Shaw the next morning. She played the recording for him 3 times. He listened carefully, making notes. When it finished, he sat back in his chair and said, "This is good. This is really good. But a defense attorney will argue it's out of context. They'll say Joy was exaggerating to impress her friend. They'll say it was just talk." Helen felt her hope deflate. "So it's not enough?" Terence said, "It's not enough to guarantee a conviction, but it's enough to reopen an investigation if we can get more." Helen said, "What do we need?" Terence said, "We need her to admit it directly to you, on record. We need her to say specifically that she made up the accusations." Helen said, "How do I do that?" Terence leaned forward. "You ask to meet with her. You play the role of a defeated mother who just wants closure. You make her feel safe. You let her think she's won." Helen said, "And she'll just admit it?" Terence said, "People who lie like this, they want to be seen as powerful. She'll want you to know that she beat you. She'll want you to feel small. That's when she'll slip." Helen said, "When do we do this?" Terence said, "Soon. Before she has time to think too hard about that conversation at the fundraiser." They spent the next 2 hours planning. Terence gave Helen a necklace with a hidden microphone. He showed her how to activate it. He explained the legal protections they had under single-party consent laws. He said, "You can't threaten her. You can't coerce her. You just ask questions and let her talk. Can you do that?" Helen said, "I can do whatever I have to do." Terence helped Helen craft a message to send to Mercy Terry. The message said that Helen wanted to meet with Joy privately, that she was ready to move forward and find peace, that she thought a conversation might help both families heal. Mercy responded within 2 hours. She said Joy was willing to meet. She suggested a coffee shop downtown, a public place where Joy would feel safe. They set the meeting for 3 days later. Helen spent those 3 days practicing. She practiced keeping her voice calm. She practiced asking open-ended questions. She practiced not reacting when she heard things that made her want to scream. The morning of the meeting, Helen tested the necklace microphone. She wore a simple outfit, jeans and a sweater. She didn't want to look threatening or angry. She wanted to look broken. She arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. She ordered a tea she didn't drink and sat at a corner table where she could see the door. Joy walked in right on time. She looked confident, relaxed. She was wearing designer jeans and a jacket that probably cost more than Helen's car payment. Joy sat down across from Helen and said, "Thanks for reaching out, Mrs. Barber. I think this is good, for both of us." Helen forced herself to smile. "I just need to understand what happened. I need closure." Joy nodded sympathetically. "I get that. This has been hard on everyone." Helen said, "Can you just help me understand? My son swears nothing happened. I'm his mother. I need to know the truth." Joy shifted in her seat. "Mrs. Barber, I know you want to believe your son, but things happened. He made me uncomfortable." Helen said, "But what specifically? I've gone over everything 1,000 times. I don't understand." Joy looked annoyed. "Are you asking me to prove it again? Because I already went through that." Helen shook her head quickly. "No, I'm not asking you to prove anything. I just need to understand for myself. Maybe something got miscommunicated?" Joy relaxed slightly. "I mean, yeah. Maybe some things got exaggerated during the legal process." Helen's heart rate picked up, but she kept her voice steady. "Exaggerated?" Joy sighed. "Look, the lawyer told me to describe everything in the worst way possible, to make sure the school took it seriously. That's just how these things work. Helen said, "So things were exaggerated? What does that mean exactly?" Joy leaned back in her chair. "It means your son wasn't some monster. But once everything started, I couldn't just back out." Helen said, "Why not?" Joy looked at her like the answer was obvious. "Because by then there was money involved. My parents had hired lawyers. The lawsuit was filed. I couldn't just say I was wrong." Helen said, "So nothing actually happened?" Joy paused. She looked at Helen carefully, like she was trying to figure out if this was a trap. Finally, she said, "Not like I said it did in the reports. It was a misunderstanding, but it got bigger than I meant it to." Helen said, "A misunderstanding that got you $850,000? Joy's face hardened. "I didn't ask for that. The lawyers handled it." Helen said, "But you took the money." Joy said, "Of course I took the money. What was I supposed to do? Give it back?" Helen said, "Did you think about what this would do to Dominique?" Joy looked uncomfortable for the first time. "That's not my fault. I didn't make him do anything." Helen said, "You destroyed his life over a lie." Joy stood up abruptly. "Wait, are you recording this?" Helen stood too. She looked Joy in the eye and said, "Yes." Joy's face went white. "You can't do that, that's illegal." Helen said, "Single-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm part of." Joy's voice rose. "I'll sue you. My parents will sue you." Helen said, "Good luck with that. I have you on tape admitting you lied." Joy backed away from the table. "You tricked me," Helen said. "No, I gave you a chance to tell the truth. You chose not to." Joy turned and practically ran out of the coffee shop. Helen sat back down and stopped the recording on her necklace. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. But she had what she needed. She called Terrence. She said, "I got it. I got all of it." Before moving on, a quick thank you to everyone watching and supporting this channel. Your presence truly keeps it alive. This community continues to grow because of people who believe in real, meaningful storytelling. Becoming a channel member unlocks exclusive extras, behind-the-scenes content, and directly helps us bring more powerful true stories to light. Your support makes a real difference. And we'd love to know who's here. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. If you're still tuned in right now, write "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's watching till the end. Don't forget to like this video too. Now, let's continue. Helen and Terrence took both recordings to Diana Caldwell at the Innocence Project the next morning. Diana was a civil rights attorney who specialized in wrongful convictions and false accusations. Diana listened to the fundraiser recording first. Then she listened to the coffee shop recording. When both finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, she said, "This is prosecutable. Clear admission of fraud and perjury. We can take this to the district attorney." Helen felt relief wash over her for the first time in 18 months. "So they'll believe us?" Diana said. "With evidence this strong?" "Yes. This isn't a he said, she said anymore. This is her own words admitting she lied." They scheduled a meeting with District Attorney Malcolm Rivers for that afternoon. Malcolm was in his 50s, a career prosecutor who had a reputation for being tough, but fair. Diana presented the case. She played both recordings. She showed Malcolm the timeline inconsistencies from the original investigation. She showed him Joy's social media posts, showing a complete lack of trauma symptoms. Malcolm listened without interrupting. When Diana finished, he said, "This is bad. This is really bad." Helen said, "For Joy Terry, you mean?" Malcolm said, "For everyone. The school, the investigation, the settlement. This whole thing was built on lies and no one caught it." Diana said, "So you'll reopen the case?" Malcolm nodded slowly. "I don't have a choice. This is clear evidence of perjury and fraud. I'll assign investigators immediately." Helen said, "What about my son? Can his record be cleared?" Malcolm said, "If the investigation confirms what these recordings show, then yes. We'll vacate everything. Expulsion, allegations, all of it." Helen started crying. Malcolm handed her a box of tissues and said, "Mrs. Barber, I'm sorry this happened to your son. The system failed him. We failed him. The investigation moved quickly once Malcolm assigned resources to it. Detectives re-interviewed everyone who had been involved in the original case. They started with Joy's friend Pamela. When detectives showed up at her door, Pamela was terrified. She admitted immediately that Joy had bragged about lying multiple times. She said Joy talked about playing up the trauma to make sure the school paid. Detectives interviewed teachers who had Joy and Dominique in their classes. None of them had ever witnessed any concerning interactions. Several said they had always felt uncomfortable with how quickly the school moved to expel Dominique without concrete evidence. Detectives reviewed the school's security footage again. This time they looked at it with fresh eyes. The footage showed Joy walking past Dominique in hallways multiple times without any reaction. No fear, no avoidance, nothing that suggested she was scared of him. The timeline analysis was even more damning. Joy had claimed incidents happened over several weeks. But Dominique's football practice schedule showed he was at training during most of the times Joy specified. His coach provided attendance logs that proved Dominique was where he said he was. Investigators brought in a forensic accountant to trace the settlement money. The accountant documented every purchase the Terry family had made since receiving the $850,000. New car, home renovations, luxury goods, vacation expenses, nothing that suggested a family dealing with trauma. They subpoenaed Joy's therapy records. The therapist who had treated Joy was required to turn over her notes. Those notes revealed something interesting. The therapist had written multiple times that Joy seemed to be performing, rather than genuinely processing trauma. The therapist had even recommended to Emmanuel and Mercy that they consider whether Joy might be exaggerating her symptoms. Emmanuel and Mercy had never followed up on that recommendation. Detectives interviewed Richard Castellano, the attorney who had handled Joy's civil case. Richard refused to answer most questions, citing attorney-client privilege. But he did admit that Joy's story had changed multiple times during their preparation for the lawsuit. He said he had advised her to keep her story consistent, but she struggled to do so. After 2 weeks of investigation, detectives brought Joy in for a formal interview. She arrived with a different attorney, a criminal defense lawyer this time. Her parents came with her, but they looked terrified. The detectives played both recordings. Joy sat in silence while her own voice filled the room. When the recordings ended, her attorney asked for a private consultation. They spent 30 minutes in a separate room. When they came back, Joy's face was red and blotchy from crying. Her attorney said, "My client would like to make a statement." Joy read from a prepared piece of paper. Her voice shook. She said, "I lied about what Dominique Barber did to me. Nothing happened between us. I was angry because he ignored me and I wanted attention. I never thought it would go this far. I'm sorry." Detectives asked follow-up questions. Joy admitted that the hallway bump was the only real interaction they'd ever had. She admitted that she made up the claims about him following her and making inappropriate comments. She admitted that her attorney had coached her on what to say to make the lawsuit stronger. She said she never expected Dominique to be expelled. She thought the school would suspend him for a few days, and then everything would blow over. She said she didn't realize how much damage she was causing until it was too late to take it back. Joy was formally charged with perjury in the 3rd degree, fraud in the 2nd degree, and conspiracy to defraud. Her bail was set at $50,000. Emmanuel and Mercy posted it using money from the settlement. The news broke that same evening. Every local media outlet ran the story. False accusation case. Teen admits to lying about football star. The coverage was brutal. Joy's name and photo were plastered everywhere. The details of her confession were reported in full. Social media exploded with anger and condemnation. Helen watched the news coverage from her living room. Dominique sat next to her. They held hands and didn't speak. Finally, Dominique said, "Is it really over?" Helen said, "Not yet, but we're close." Malcolm Rivers scheduled a press conference for the following week. He wanted time to finalize the paperwork that would officially clear Dominique's name. The press conference was held at the courthouse. Malcolm stood at a podium with Helen and Dominique beside him. News cameras lined the back of the room. Reporters filled the seats. Malcolm began, "I'm here today to address a serious miscarriage of justice. 18 months ago, Dominique Barber was accused of misconduct by a classmate. Those accusations led to his expulsion from school and the destruction of his reputation. I can now confirm that those accusations were false. He explained the investigation. He described the recordings that proved Joy had lied. He detailed the evidence that had always supported Dominique's innocence, but had been ignored. Malcolm said, "This young man's life was destroyed based on lies. The system that should have protected him failed at every level. The school failed him. The investigation failed him. And yes, my office failed him by not looking harder at the facts from the beginning." He announced that all charges and allegations against Dominique were being vacated. His expulsion was overturned. His record would be cleared completely. The school district had agreed to issue a formal apology and offer him reinstatement. Malcolm said, "Dominique Barber is innocent. He has always been innocent, and I deeply regret that it took this long to establish that truth." Helen was invited to speak. She stepped up to the microphone and said, "For 18 months, my son and I have lived in hell. We were abandoned by our community. We were called liars when we told the truth. We were treated like criminals when we were victims." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "My son never stopped being innocent. You all stopped believing in truth. You stopped caring about facts. You destroyed him because it was easier than asking questions." She looked directly at the cameras. "I hope every person who turned their back on us is watching this. I hope you feel ashamed, because you should be." Dominique didn't want to speak, but Helen encouraged him. He stepped up to the microphone and stood there for a moment without saying anything. Finally, he said, "I don't know who I am anymore. The person I was before all this happened is gone. I'll never get that back. But at least now people know I didn't do what they said I did." He stepped back from the microphone. Helen put her arm around him. The press conference ended. Reporters shouted questions, but Malcolm waved them off. He walked Helen and Dominique out through a side door to avoid the crowd. In the car, Dominique said, "Do you think anyone actually cares that they were wrong?" Helen said, "Some will, most won't. People don't like admitting they made mistakes." The media coverage was extensive. Every outlet that had reported on Dominique's expulsion now reported on his exoneration. Headlines read, "Football star cleared after false accusation," and "Teen admits to lying, innocent boy's life destroyed." Social media reactions were mixed. Some people apologized for believing Joy. Some people said they had always doubted her story. Some people blamed the school for not investigating properly. Some people blamed Joy's parents for enabling her. A small number of people still defended Joy. They said she was young and made a mistake. They said she shouldn't be vilified for the rest of her life. They said the real villains were the adults who should have caught the lie earlier. Helen had no sympathy for any of it. As far as she was concerned, everyone who had turned on Dominique was complicit in what happened to him. College coaches started reaching out within days. They had read the news coverage. They wanted Dominique to know they were interested again. They said things like, "We always believed in you," and "We knew the truth would come out." Dominique didn't believe any of them. He told Helen, "They didn't believe in me. They abandoned me the second it was convenient." Helen said, "You don't have to talk to any of them if you don't want to." But Dominique needed to think about his future. He had lost 2 years. He was older now. He hadn't trained seriously in 18 months. His body wasn't in the shape it had been before the accusation. He agreed to take meetings with a few schools. Some were genuine. They acknowledged that they should have handled things differently. They offered support beyond just athletics, mental health resources, academic tutoring, a real commitment to his well-being. Other schools were opportunistic. They saw Dominique as a redemption story, good publicity, a feel-good narrative they could use for recruiting. Dominique chose a smaller Division II program that felt right. It wasn't the big division I dreamed he'd had before, but it was something. It was a chance to play football again and get an education. He accepted a partial scholarship. He would study social work. Football would be part of his life, but it wouldn't define him anymore. The community tried to make amends. Neighbors who had shunned Helen and Dominique suddenly wanted to welcome them back. They brought casseroles and apology cards. They said things like, "We're so glad the truth came out," and "We always knew you were a good kid." Helen accepted their gestures with cold politeness. She didn't forgive them. She couldn't. These were the same people who had crossed the street to avoid them, who had whispered behind their backs, who had believed the worst without question. Dominique was even less forgiving. He told his former teammates that he didn't want their apologies. He told his former friends that their silence when he needed them had shown him who they really were. The church held a special service to welcome the Barbers back. The pastor gave a sermon about redemption and forgiveness. He never once acknowledged that the church had abandoned them when they needed support most. Helen and Dominique attended the service once. They never went back. Teachers at the school reached out to Dominique. They said they were sorry. They said they should have fought harder for him. They said they regretted not speaking up. Dominique accepted their apologies but didn't trust them. He knew they had protected their jobs over protecting him. He understood that, but he didn't have to like it. The school district offered Dominique his diploma and the chance to walk at a makeup graduation ceremony. He declined. He said, "I don't want anything from that place." Helen supported his decision. She said, "You don't owe them your presence. They took everything from you. You don't have to give them your forgiveness too." Slowly, life started to resemble something normal. Dominique enrolled in college. Helen found a better job with benefits. They moved into a nicer apartment. But both of them carried scars that wouldn't heal. Dominique had nightmares about being arrested. He had panic attacks in crowded places. He struggled to trust anyone outside of his mother. Helen had her own trauma. She woke up multiple times every night to check on Dominique because she was terrified he would hurt himself. She had anxiety attacks whenever her phone rang unexpectedly. She couldn't watch news coverage of false accusations without having to leave the room. They both started therapy. It helped, but it didn't fix everything. Some damage is permanent. One evening, Helen and Dominique sat on their small balcony watching the sunset. Dominique said, "Do you think we'll ever be okay?" Helen said, "I think we'll be different, but different doesn't mean broken." Dominique said, "I miss who I used to be." Helen said, "I know, but that person couldn't have survived what you survived. Maybe the person you are now is stronger." Dominique didn't respond, but he leaned his head on his mother's shoulder and they sat there together until dark. Joy Terry's trial began 8 months after her confession. The prosecution had a straightforward case. They had Joy's own words admitting to the lie. They had evidence showing the accusations were false. They had testimony from people Joy had bragged to about getting away with it. Joy's defense attorney tried to paint her as a troubled teenager who made a mistake. He argued that she never intended for things to go as far as they did. He said she was influenced by adults who should have known better. Her parents, her attorney, the school administrators who rushed to judgment. The prosecution wasn't buying it. They argued that Joy had knowingly and deliberately destroyed an innocent person's life for money and attention. They said she had multiple opportunities to tell the truth and chose not to. They said she spent 18 months living lavishly off money she got by lying. Joy took the stand in her own defense. She cried through most of her testimony. She said she was sorry. She said she never meant to hurt Dominique. She said she was young and stupid and didn't understand the consequences of what she was doing. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor tore her testimony apart. He asked why she bragged to Pamela if she felt so guilty. He asked why she spent the settlement money on luxury items if she was traumatized. He asked why she posted photos of herself partying if she was suffering. Joy didn't have good answers. She said she was confused. She said she made mistakes. She said she wished she could take it all back. The prosecutor played the recordings of Joy admitting to the lies. He played her social media posts showing her living extravagantly. He showed receipts for designer clothes and expensive vacations. He said, "This is not a confused teenager who made a mistake. This is a young woman who saw an opportunity to get rich and took it, regardless of who she destroyed in the process." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Joy guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. Dominique and Helen sat in the front row of the courtroom gallery. Joy sat at the defense table with her attorney. Emmanuel and Mercy sat behind her, both looking like they had aged 10 years. The judge reviewed the case before announcing the sentence. She said, "Miss Terry, you weaponized the justice system for personal gain. You destroyed a young man's life. You contributed to a culture where real victims of misconduct are less likely to be believed. Your actions have caused immeasurable harm." She sentenced Joy to 6 years in prison with eligibility for parole after 3 years. Upon release, Joy would serve 10 years of probation. She was also ordered to repay the full $850,000 settlement, plus an additional $1.2 million in damages to Dominique. Joy broke down crying when the sentence was announced. Emmanuel and Mercy looked devastated. Helen felt nothing watching Joy cry. No satisfaction, no relief, just exhaustion. Outside the courtroom, reporters asked Helen if she felt justice had been served. Helen said, "My son lost 2 years of his life. His future was destroyed. His mental health will never fully recover. No prison sentence fixes that." Social media response to the sentencing was vicious. Joy's photo was shared thousands of times with captions calling her every name imaginable. People who had defended her earlier now pretended they had known she was lying all along. Joy's friends deleted photos with her from their social media. Several posted statements saying they no longer associated with her and condemned her actions. Pamela, the friend who had been with Joy at the fundraiser, gave an interview to a local news station. She said, "I should have said something sooner. I knew she was lying. I was just too scared to get involved." Joy's social media accounts were deleted, but people saved screenshots and continued sharing them. Her name became synonymous with false accusations. Articles about her case were used as teaching examples in law schools and criminal justice classes. Emmanuel and Mercy faced their own consequences. Emmanuel lost his job after his employer received complaints from customers who didn't want to work with him. Mercy was forced to resign from the elementary school after parents complained about her judgment. They had to sell their house to pay legal fees. The settlement money was already spent or tied up in court-ordered restitution. They declared bankruptcy within 6 months. Their extended family cut ties with them. Emmanuel's siblings said they were ashamed to be related to people who had enabled Joy's behavior. Mercy's parents issued a public statement saying they hadn't spoken to their daughter in months. Emmanuel and Mercy eventually moved to a different state. They rented a small apartment and took whatever jobs they could find. Their marriage barely survived the stress. They issued a public apology video that was posted online. In it, Emmanuel said, "We failed our daughter by always believing her without question. We failed Dominique Barbet by not demanding proof before supporting Joy's accusations. We failed as parents and as people." Mercy added, "We enabled Joy's worst behavior from the time she was a child. We taught her that lying had no consequences. We are responsible for who she became." The video was viewed millions of times. Comments were split between people who appreciated the apology and people who said it was too little too late. Helen watched the video once. She didn't respond to it publicly. Privately, she told Dominique, "They're sorry now. But that doesn't undo what they did." The school district faced its own reckoning. Parents and community members demanded answers about how Joy's accusations were handled. Why was there no proper investigation? Why was Dominique expelled so quickly? Why did no one question Joy's story? The superintendent issued a statement saying the district took the matter seriously and would be implementing new protocols. Those protocols included mandatory evidence review before disciplinary action, neutral fact finders for investigations, and timely appeal processes for accused students. Several school board members who had voted to expel Dominique resigned. They claimed it was for unrelated reasons, but everyone knew it was because of the public pressure. Mr. Whitmore, the principal who had handled Joy's accusations, was reassigned to a different position within the district. He never publicly apologized to Dominique. The state legislature took notice of the case. A senator introduced a bill called Dominique's Law that would impose criminal penalties for proven false accusations and provide additional protections for accused individuals during investigations. The bill passed with bipartisan support. It required schools to complete thorough evidence-based investigations before taking disciplinary action. It mandated that accused students receive due process rights, and it established penalties for anyone who knowingly made false accusations. National advocacy organizations used Dominique's case as a teaching example. The Innocence Project featured Helen and Dominique in a documentary about false accusations and system failures. Legal conferences analyzed the case to identify what went wrong and how similar situations could be prevented. Helen was invited to speak at universities and law schools. She talked about the importance of due process. She emphasized that believing accusers was essential, but so was verifying facts before destroying someone's life. Her message was always the same. My son was innocent from day one, but innocence doesn't matter if no one bothers to look for the truth. Helen used portions of the settlement money from the school district to establish the Raymond Barber Foundation for the wrongfully accused. The foundation provided legal assistance and mental health resources for families facing false accusations. She donated the rest to organizations focused on criminal justice reform. She wanted the money to go toward preventing what happened to Dominique from happening to other families. Helen eventually wrote a memoir about their experience. The book was called A Mother's Fight: How I Saved My Son When the System Failed. It became a bestseller and sparked national conversations about false accusations, due process, and parental advocacy. Helen appeared on podcasts and news programs. She was interviewed by major publications. She became a voice for families who felt abandoned by institutions that were supposed to protect them. Through it all, Helen remained focused on one thing: making sure that what happened to Dominique mattered, that their suffering wasn't for nothing, that other families might be spared the same nightmare. She told an interviewer once, "I couldn't save those 2 years, but I can save someone else's future. That has to be enough." Dominique started college 2 years later than planned. He was 20 years old when he enrolled. Most of his classmates were 18. He felt out of place. Football was different than he remembered. His body wasn't the same. He had lost muscle mass during his depression. His speed wasn't what it used to be. But more than that, his mind wasn't in it anymore. He played because it felt like something he was supposed to do. But the joy was gone. The game that had once been everything to him now felt like going through motions. His coach noticed. After practice one day, he pulled Dominique aside and said, "You don't have to keep doing this if your heart's not in it." Dominique said, "Football was supposed to be my future." The coach said, "Maybe it was, but that doesn't mean it has to be now. You're allowed to want something different." Dominique thought about that conversation for weeks. He realized the coach was right. He was holding on to football because it represented who he used to be. But that person was gone. He quit the team after his first semester. It felt like giving up at first. Then, it felt like relief. He focused on his studies instead. Social work had initially been a backup plan, but it started to feel like a calling. He wanted to help kids who felt alone and misunderstood. He wanted to be the adult he had needed when his life fell apart. Dominique excelled in his classes. Professors noticed his maturity and his genuine passion for the work. He completed internships at youth centers and community organizations. He discovered he was good at connecting with teenagers who had experienced trauma. During his junior year, Dominique started speaking publicly about his experience. Not often, and only when he felt strong enough. But he told his story to youth groups and at schools. He talked about false accusations and their impact on real victims. His message was clear. What happened to me was wrong. But we can't let cases like mine be used as an excuse to disbelieve real victims. We have to find a balance between protecting the accused and supporting those who have been harmed. Dominique graduated with honors. He got a job as a youth counselor at a community center in a different city. He wanted a fresh start somewhere people didn't know his story. He met a woman named Shayla during his first year working. She was a teacher at a nearby elementary school. They met at a professional development workshop and started talking. She didn't know who he was or what had happened to him. Dominique told her the truth on their third date. He said he needed her to know before things went any further. He explained everything, The accusations, the expulsion, the trial, the aftermath. Shayla listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "That sounds horrible. I'm sorry that happened to you." She didn't treat him differently after that. She didn't pity him or ask invasive questions. She just accepted it as part of his history and moved forward. They got married 2 years later. Helen cried through the entire ceremony. She had worried that Dominique would never trust anyone enough to build a life with them. Dominique and Shayla had twin daughters 3 years after their wedding. Dominique named one of them after his father. He wanted his children to know where they came from and what their family had survived. He was a careful parent, sometimes too careful. He worried constantly about his daughter's safety and happiness. Shayla had to remind him that he couldn't protect them from everything. Dominique worked hard to be present for his daughters in ways his father hadn't been able to be for him. Not because Raymond didn't care, but because Raymond had died too soon. He took them to the park. He read them bedtime stories. He showed up at every school event. He told them every day that they were loved and safe. Helen retired from active advocacy work when the twins were born. She wanted to focus on being a grandmother. She had spent years fighting for justice and helping other families. Now she wanted peace. She still wrote occasional op-eds about criminal justice reform. She still gave interviews when major false accusation cases made the news. But mostly, she spent her time with her granddaughters. Helen lived modestly despite the settlement money. She kept a small apartment. She drove an old car. She didn't need much. The money she had left after her donations went into a trust fund for Dominique's daughters. On quiet evenings, Helen and Dominique would sit on her balcony and watch the twins play. Helen would say things like, "Look at what we built. Look at what survived." Dominique would nod. He understood what she meant. They had been broken. They had been destroyed. But they had rebuilt something new from the pieces. He told Helen once, "I don't think I'll ever fully heal from what happened. Part of me will always be that scared kid who lost everything." Helen said, "That's okay. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry the weight without letting it crush you." Dominique still had nightmares sometimes. He still struggled with anxiety in crowded places. He still had moments where he didn't trust people's intentions. But he also had good days. Days where he laughed with his daughters. Days where he felt proud of the work he was doing. Days where he remembered that survival was its own kind of victory. Helen had her own struggles. She never fully forgave the community that had turned on them. She never went back to that church. She never reconnected with most of the friends who had abandoned her. But she found new friends. People who knew her story and admired her strength. People who understood that some relationships can't be repaired. She also found peace in knowing that her fight had mattered. Dominique's law had prevented similar cases in their state. Her foundation had helped dozens of families. Her book had changed public conversations about due process. Raymond's memory lived on through all of it. Helen visited his grave once a month. She told him about Dominique's life, about his marriage, about his daughters, about how he had survived the worst and built something good anyway. She told Raymond, "We did it. We got our boy out. We gave him a chance." And somewhere across the state, in a women's correctional facility, Joy Terry served out her sentence. Joy Terry was released from prison after serving 3.5 years. She had been a model prisoner. She participated in therapy. She took classes. She stayed out of trouble. But the world she returned to wasn't interested in her rehabilitation. She was released on a Tuesday morning with nothing but the clothes on her back and a probation officer's phone number. Her parents picked her up from the prison. The drive to their apartment was silent. Emmanuel and Mercy had aged dramatically. They looked tired and defeated. Joy's probation terms were strict. She had to find employment within 30 days. She had to attend weekly therapy sessions. She had to perform community service. She couldn't leave the state without permission. She had to make monthly restitution payments toward the money she owed Dominique. Finding a job was nearly impossible. Her name was well known. A simple internet search brought up hundreds of articles about her case. Employers didn't want the liability or the publicity. She eventually found work at a fast food restaurant that was desperate for staff. The pay was minimum wage. The work was exhausting. Her co-workers avoided her once they figured out who she was. Joy lived with her parents because she couldn't afford her own place. Their relationship was strained. They rarely spoke beyond necessary conversation. Mercy sometimes looked at Joy like she didn't recognize her own daughter. Joy attended therapy as required. Her therapist worked with her to understand why she had made the choices she did. Joy talked about feeling invisible as a teenager, about wanting attention and validation, about not understanding the weight of her lies until it was too late. The therapist asked her once, "If you could talk to Dominique Barber now, what would you say?" Joy said, "I would tell him I'm sorry, but I know that's not enough. Nothing I say will ever be enough." Joy lived under a different name to avoid recognition. She deleted all social media. She avoided public places where someone might recognize her face. She made her monthly restitution payments, small amounts that would take decades to pay off the full debt. The money came out of her paychecks before she even saw them. Joy had no friends, no relationships, no prospects for a normal life. She existed in a state of permanent consequence. Her story was occasionally mentioned in news articles about false accusations. She was the cautionary tale, the example of what happens when you lie and destroy someone's life. Joy gave one interview several years after her release. She said, "I was a stupid, selfish teenager who didn't think about consequences. I destroyed an innocent person's life because I wanted attention. I will regret that for the rest of my life." The interviewer asked if she thought she deserved forgiveness. Joy said, "I don't think about what I deserve. I think about what I did, and I know I can never fix it." Emmanuel and Mercy Terry maintained minimal contact with extended family. Most relatives wanted nothing to do with them. They were blamed for enabling Joy, for believing her lies, for not raising her better. Emmanuel worked as a security guard at a shopping mall. Mercy worked as a receptionist at a dental office. Neither job paid well. They struggled to make ends meet. They rarely discussed what happened. The guilt was too heavy. They had enabled their daughter's behavior for years, and the result was catastrophic. They stayed together, but their marriage was hollowed out. They were bound by shared shame more than love. Years later, Emmanuel gave a statement to a reporter working on a retrospective about the case. He said, "We thought we were protecting our daughter. We thought we were being good parents. We were wrong about everything." Mercy added, "I think about Dominique Barber every day, about what we helped take from him. I will carry that for the rest of my life." Meanwhile, Dominique's life continued forward. He was in his early 30s now. His daughters were in elementary school. He had built a stable, meaningful life. He occasionally thought about Joy, not with anger anymore, more with a kind of distant curiosity. He wondered if she had learned anything, if she was different now, if she ever really understood what she had done. But mostly, he didn't think about her at all. She was a chapter in his past, a terrible chapter that had shaped him but didn't define him. Helen was in her 60s now. Her health wasn't perfect, but she was happy. She spent her days with her granddaughters. She volunteered with her foundation. She wrote when inspiration struck. She thought about Raymond often, about the promise she had made at his grave. She had kept that promise. Dominique had made it out. He had built a life. He was okay. One afternoon, Helen and Dominique sat on a park bench watching the twins play on the swings. Helen said, "Do you ever think about what you would say to Joy if you saw her?" Dominique thought about it. Then he said, "I don't know. Maybe nothing. What is there to say?" Helen nodded. "That's probably wise." Dominique said, "I used to want her to suffer. I wanted her to feel what she put me through. But now I realize she's already suffering. Her whole life is a consequence of what she did." Helen said, "Does that feel like justice to you?" Dominique said, "I don't know what justice feels like anymore. I know I survived. That has to be enough." They sat in silence for a while, watching the girls play. The sun was warm. The day was peaceful. Life had found a way to be good again despite everything. Helen said, "Your father would be proud of you." Dominique said, "I hope so." Helen said, "I know so." The case was still referenced in legal discussions and criminal justice courses. Dominique's law remained in effect, protecting accused students in their state. Helen's foundation continued to help families. The story became a part of the cultural conversation about false accusations and due process. It was used as an example in debates about believing victims while protecting the innocent. But for Dominique and Helen, it was just their life. The thing they had survived. The story that had shaped them. Dominique had learned to live with the scars. He had learned that some damage never fully heals, but you can build a life around it anyway. He had learned that survival was victory enough. Helen had learned that love could be a weapon when everything else failed. That a mother's determination could move mountains. That truth always finds its way to the surface if you're willing to dig for it. And together, they had learned that the people who abandon you when you need them most show you who they really are. That forgiveness is optional. That you don't owe anyone your peace just because they're finally ready to apologize. They had learned that family isn't always about blood. That strength comes from unexpected places. That rebuilding is possible even when everything has been destroyed. The twins ran over to the bench, laughing and out of breath. They climbed onto Dominique's lap and started talking over each other about what they had seen on the playground. Helen watched her son smile at his daughters. She watched him be present and loving and whole despite everything that had tried to break him. And she thought, this is what we fought for. This moment right here. This proof that they didn't win. Because in the end, Dominique Barber had something Joy Terry would never have. He had his integrity intact. He had people who loved him unconditionally. He had a future built on truth instead of lies. And that, more than any verdict or settlement or apology, was the real victory. This is a story about many things. About jealousy. About systems that fail the people they're supposed to protect. About money and lies and the cost of both. But most of all, it's a story about the power of one person who refused to let a lie become the truth. Dominique Barber's life was stolen from him by 6 words. He made me feel unsafe. It took 18 months, 2 recordings, and a mother's relentless love to get it back. Statistics tell us that approximately 2 to 10% of accusations are proven false. But for those falsely accused, the damage is often irreversible. Reputations destroyed, futures stolen, lives altered permanently. Helen Barber didn't have a law degree. She didn't have money. She didn't have power. But she had something more valuable than any of those things. The unshakable belief that her son deserved truth. Joy Terry isn't the only villain in this story. The system that allowed her lie to thrive shares responsibility. When institutions rush to judgment, when they prioritize optics over evidence, when they forget that accusations must be proven and not just believed, they create victims out of innocent people. But this story also shows us something else. It shows us that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always fight its way to the surface. It shows us that a parent's love is one of the most powerful forces in the world. And it shows us that survival, even when it comes with scars, is its own kind of victory. Dominique Barber's story isn't just about what was taken from him. It's about what he refused to let go of, his dignity, his truth, and his future. And Helen Barber's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to give up when everyone else already has. If you've been moved by this story, consider supporting organizations that fight for the wrongfully accused. Advocate for due process reform in your own community. Remember that everyone deserves to be heard, but everyone also deserves proof of guilt before being punished. Make sure to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Subscribe to the channel for more deep investigations into cases that demand justice. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps us continue bringing truth to light. Thank you for watching. And remember, some accusations kill dreams, but some mothers refuse to let those dreams die.